just whilst we were changing over guests, Viv was asking, do we talk BRIC or BRICS with the S? And I still say we talk about BRIC economies because many people say South Africa doesn't quite fit within the grouping.
Absolutely. I think that if you consider that the BRICS collective GDP is $9 trillion and South Africa's is only 300 billion, I think it's a bit premature to presume that we're part of that kind of size. But certainly the geopolitical strength of the BRICS is something that South Africa is participating in, and there is mutual benefit for both us to represent Africa and the BRICS to represent us in these global forums.
Let's talk about the growing significance of BRIC economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China. It's believed that by year 2015 they will collectively comprise 60% of global GDP. So they're becoming quite important players within the global economic landscape, especially with regards to the turmoil we're seeing in Greece and some of the challenges we've seen in the United States. Are we taking them as seriously as we should?
Well, absolutely. I mean, us at Standard Bank certainly are. I think that if you consider that BRICS GDP is likely to increase from 9 trillion to 18 trillion by 2015, and this thrust has certainly captured the imagination, but it's also included countries in Latin America, Asia, and of course Africa. And as a result, Africa's GDP is also likely to increase from 1.5 to $3 trillion over the same time period, whereas, as you mentioned, advanced economies are only likely to increase by a quarter. So we certainly are seeing Africa benefit a great deal from these global thrusts.
Let's draw the distinction between global GDP and global trade, because in the last 10 years, global trade has tripled to come to $32.2 trillion, and a significant proportion of that trade comes from emerging market economies, trading with the advanced economies, trading amongst themselves.
Absolutely. I mean, trade's been a cornerstone of this new globalized era. And those nations that have attached themselves most successfully to global supply chains have also been the ones that have benefited most from this thrust. Emerging markets have been particularly good at positioning themselves, and as a result we've seen their share of world trade double from 20 to 40%. In large part this is on the back of BRICS trading a lot with other emerging markets, and that trade's increased ninefold to $1.5 trillion. And as a result, I mean, even Africa, a fifth of our trade is now with BRIC counterparties. So trade's been a critical element in the BRIC phenomenon.
But we can't discount the role of the Western economies, where out of this figure of 32 trillion, for instance, they still contribute over 11 or so trillion, just the EU and the American country itself. And yet they are the epicenter of global debt problems right now, currency fluctuations right now. How do they retain their dominance?
Look, I think that trade and investment routes are being recalibrated as we sit here in favor of the emerging Asia and emerging South. But it would be naive to ignore the role of nations like Europe and of course America in global trade flows. For instance, Africa, 40% of our trade is with Europe. So obviously macroeconomic sluggishness there, exemplified by the vulnerabilities in Greece and Italy, Spain, obviously have an effect on us. But the point is that the emerging markets have loosened the grip of advanced economies on our economic vista. And I think that trend is one that we're very excited about and interested in seeing continue.
The one thing that fascinates me is the Goldman Sachs report drafted about 5 years ago about the next 11 emerging markets to look out for, besides Brazil, Russia, India and China. And from that report are countries like Mexico, Indonesia, Turkey, and then in Africa it's Nigeria and Egypt, and South Africa doesn't feature there. Should we be concerned?
I think in many respects we should be concerned. I think that Africa's a great opportunity for South Africa to participate more meaningfully in global trade and investment flows. And I think that we've been somewhat passive in how we've engaged in this and realigned our perceptions of what it means to be in Africa and doing business in other emerging markets. So I think that there has been some kind of lack of constructive engagement in this, but I am seeing, I mean, amongst clients and phone calls and presentations that I make on a daily basis, I see that there is a renewed interest in what's happening in Africa and how South Africa can be involved.
All right, Viv, let's bring into the conversation of the growing South-South trade. 25% of that trade is done with either Brazil, Russia, India or China. We know of significant Brazilian, Indian and Chinese investments in Africa. The Chinese, the figure is almost at $100 billion across Africa. India is over 37 billion, and within Lusophone African states, the Brazilians have taken a significant prominent role.
Yes, the Brazilians coming in with their ability to extract. I mean, the BRICS also are a bit strange in terms of like Brazil and Russia, to some extent, commodity exporting countries, and India and China are importing. And one mustn't take too much into account when one says, you know, they're going to be a global kind of, you know, agreement between the four countries. I mean, there's obviously competing, you know, interests here. I mean, Brazil, India and China, for instance, have been at war a couple of times. So they are competing interests in not just this cooperation that we are seeing. One thing I did notice is over the last couple of weeks, we did see certain things, like, for instance, certain moves by Brazil and Turkey to intervene in Iran. These are moves that are quite strange. For instance, you're thinking someone like Brazil intervening in a geopolitical situation as large as Iran. Are we seeing certain moves like that from China, India as well, trying to throw their weight around, not just economically, but politically as well?
Absolutely. I think that the one of the important aspects of the BRIC story and how Africa is participating is their growing political influence in multilateral forums, institutions, the G20, the IMF, etc., etc. So there's a growing responsibility on behalf of being a leading emerging market economy like the BRICS. And you are seeing that, you know, India, China, Brazil, Russia are taking this responsibility a little bit more seriously, and participating meaningfully in global political dialogue.
Yeah, in the Middle East, we're seeing that a lot. Okay, just a final input. BRIC Africa trade has grown to an average of 30%, which is good for the fortunes of Africa. But are we doing enough as Africa to promote intra-African trade?
I think that's a great question. Intra-Africa trade has to be a priority, and I think that we have been a little bit passive in supporting that. If you look at the case of Asia, product fragmentation and then the coordination of export policies has been critical in their trade growth and explosion in their GDP. And in a large degree, Africa hasn't really done enough to pursue that. We need to look at global supply chains more holistically and look at Africa's interlocking advantages to see how we can work together to create products that we can then export onto the supply chain. And that, in many respects, we haven't done yet.